Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive that's got me thinking a lot lately. It's about smart homes and all the EMF radiation they put out.
Oh, yeah. That's something a lot of people are talking about these days.
For sure. On the one hand, I love all the cool tech and how convenient it is, but on the other hand, you hear all this stuff about the potential health risks.
It's definitely something to think about. We're all surrounded by more and more of these devices all the time.
Exactly. So today we're going to dig into all the research and try to cut through all the noise and figure out what's what, so you can make smart choices, about all that smart tech.
Sounds good.
So one of the things that really stood out to me when I was researching all this is that some of these devices are constantly emitting EMF radiation.
Like even when you're not using them.
Yeah, like those always listening smart assistants. They're just sitting there waiting for a command, but they're still pumping out EMF. It's kind of freaky when you think about it.
It is a little bit.
Okay, so before we go any further, I think we should probably back up a sec and explain what exactly we're talking about when we say EMF radiation.
Good idea.
What is it exactly?
So EMF radiation is basically energy that travels in waves.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two main types, ionizing and non-ionizing.
Okay.
Ionizing radiation is the high energy kind. We're talking about things like X-rays and gamma rays. It's powerful enough to actually break chemical bonds in your cells, which is why, there are all those safety protocols around things like medical imaging.
Right. Like lead aprons and all that. So that's the stuff we really need to be careful with.
Exactly. But the good news is your smart home isn't blasting you with gamma rays or anything like that.
Okay, good.
The kind of radiation we're talking about with smart homes is non-ionizing radiation, which is lower in energy, lower frequency. Think of it like this. Ionizing radiation is like a laser that can cut through metal. But non-ionizing radiation is more like the warmth you feel from a light bulb.
Okay, that's a good way to put it. But even if it's less powerful, why should we be worried about the non-ionizing radiation coming from our devices?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's something that researchers are still trying to fully figure out. I mean, we know that non-ionizing radiation isn't strong enough to directly break those chemical bonds. But there's a lot of research going on right now about the potential effects of long-term exposure.
So basically it's a wait-and-see kind of thing.
In some ways, yeah. But it's definitely something to be aware of. Especially because we're talking about the same kind of radiation that's coming from our phones, laptops, Wi-Fi routers, and of course all those smart home gadgets.
It's everywhere, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
We have all these devices in our homes and on our bodies, constantly sending and receiving signals. It's a huge change from even a decade or two ago.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, just in my house alone, I've got smart speakers, a Wi-Fi router, a smart TV, streaming devices, wireless security cameras. I even have a smart doorbell. Oh, and then, of course, all the wearables like my smartwatch and my fitness tracker. It's kind of crazy when you stop and think about it. My house is basically one giant antenna.
And that's the thing, as we add more and more of these devices, our overall exposure to EMF just keeps going up and up. So the big question is, what's going to be the effect of all that exposure over time?
That's a good question. So let's talk about some of the specific health concerns that have been raised. What are people actually worried about when it comes to EMF in their smart homes?
Well, one of the big areas of concern is sleep.
Interesting.
There's been some research that suggests that EMF exposure, especially close to bedtime, can interfere with your body's production of melatonin.
Melatonin?
Yeah, it's the hormone that regulates your sleep-wake cycle.
Ah, so you're saying those late-night scroll sessions on my phone could actually be messing with my sleep.
It's possible. And, poor sleep can lead to all sorts of other problems, like mood swings, low energy, trouble focusing. It can even weaken your immune system.
Yeah, sleep is no joke. What other potential health problems are people talking about?
Some people say they experience more stress and fatigue when they're around a lot of wireless signals. They have headaches, they're irritable, they have trouble concentrating, that kind of thing.
It makes sense. Always being surrounded by that kind of stimulation, even if you don't realize it. It's like having this invisible stressor that's always on.
Exactly. And then there's also some emerging research on the potential neurological effects of EMF.
Oh, like what?
Well, some studies are suggesting that there might be a connection between prolonged EMF exposure and problems with memory and concentration. It's still a pretty new area of research, but it's definitely something to watch.
So we're talking about stuff that goes beyond just feeling tired or stressed. It could actually affect how our brains work in the long run. That's kind of scary.
It is something to think about. And of course, we can't talk about EMF radiation without talking about the big one, cancer.
Right. That's the one that always seems to make the headlines. What's the latest on that?
Well, it's complicated. The World Health Organization, their international agency for research on cancer, has classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields. That's the type emitted by smart home devices as possibly carcinogenic to humans.
Possibly carcinogenic. What does that even mean?
Okay, so basically it means that there's limited evidence linking this type of radiation to cancer in humans.
Yeah.
To put it in perspective, things like coffee and pickled vegetables are also in that same category.
So it doesn't mean there's a definite cause and effect, but there's enough evidence to warrant more research.
Exactly.
And to maybe take some precautions.
Yeah, I would say so. And it's important to keep in mind that the research on EMF and its long-term effects is still ongoing. There's still a lot we don't know.
All right. Well, this is all starting to make me feel a little overwhelmed. Part of me just wants to chuck my smartphone and go live off the grid. But before I do that, let's talk about solutions. Is there anything we can do to reduce our exposure to EMF without giving up all the cool tech we love?
Absolutely. It's all about making smart choices and taking simple steps to minimize your exposure.
Okay. Let's hear those tips. I'm all ears.
One of the easiest things you can do is to just use wired connections whenever possible.
Really?
Yeah. Like Ethernet cables, for example.
Yeah.
They give you a super reliable internet connection without giving off any of that RF radiation.
Huh. So going back to the old-fashioned way of plugging things in could actually be a good thing.
It could. It's like a digital detox for your house.
I like that. Less digital clutter, less EMF radiation. Okay, so what else can we do?
Another really important one is turning off your Wi-Fi at night.
Ah, yeah. I've heard that one before. Does it really make a difference?
It can. Minimizing your exposure while you're sleeping is really important because that's when your body is doing most of its repair and regeneration.
I guess that makes sense. I have to admit, though, I don't always remember to do it. Maybe I need to set a reminder on my... Oh, wait. Probably not the best idea to use my phone for that reminder.
Maybe a sticky note on the fridge. Or the bathroom mirror. You know something else that's important is where you put your Wi-Fi router.
Oh, yeah.
It shouldn't be in a high-traffic area. You want it to be away from bedrooms and living spaces, places where you spend a lot of time.
So basically, like, banish the router to the basement.
Something like that. Oh, and here's another thing to think about.
Huh.
A lot of our devices have features that we don't actually use all the time, like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi on your printer or that extra hotspot feature on your phone. Turning those things off when you don't need them can really help reduce your overall exposure.
Ah, never thought about that. It's kind of like decluttering your digital life, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And then there's also the obvious one. Just try to be mindful of how much you're using your devices.
Okay.
Like instead of streaming movies all day, maybe choose a book or play a board game sometimes.
Yeah, just unplug and do something offline for a while.
Exactly. And here's a simple little physics lesson for you. The further you are from a device, the less exposure you're getting. So if you're working on your laptop, take breaks to step away from it. Move your phone away from your bedside table at night. Just create some distance.
So basically the opposite of what we do most of the time. It's like we're programmed to be glued to our screens. Speaking of being glued to our screens, you mentioned creating a tech-free sanctuary for sleep earlier. What does that look like?
Think about dimming the lights an hour or so before bed.
Yeah.
Put away all your devices, phones, tablets, laptops, everything. The whole idea is to give your body a chance to wind down naturally without all the blue light and the EMF radiation.
It does sound kind of nice, actually, like going back to a simpler time. But realistically, I mean, I know some people are going to say, forget all of this, I'm keeping my smart home. Are there any tech solutions out there that can help?
There are. Actually, some manufacturers are starting to get on board with this whole EMF thing.
Okay.
And they're starting to offer low EMF or wired versions of their devices. Yeah. So it's worth doing some research and seeing what's out there. You might be surprised at what you find.
That's good to know. So it's not an all or nothing thing. We can have our smart homes and our health, too.
It's all about finding that balance and making choices that work for you and your family.
I love that. So we've covered a lot of ground here. What are some of the main things you want our listeners to take away from this?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that while smart homes are super convenient, it's important to be aware of the potential risks of EMF radiation.
Right.
We're still learning about the long-term effects, but it's a good idea to take some precautions.
And the good news is you don't have to give up all your tech. There are simple things you can do to minimize your exposure, like we were talking about, choosing wired connections whenever possible, turning off your Wi-Fi at night, creating a tech-free zone in your bedroom. Those little things can really add up.
They can. And also remember that knowledge is power. The more you know about EMF radiation, the better equipped you'll be to make smart choices about the technology you bring into your home.
It's about taking control of your tech instead of letting it control you.
Exactly.
So it's not about being afraid of technology or rejecting it altogether. It's about figuring out how to use it safely and responsibly.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that everybody's different. Some people might be more sensitive to EMF than others.
Right. Speaking of sensitivity, I wanted to ask you about something I've heard called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. What is that?
Well, it's basically a condition where people say they experience a whole range of symptoms when they're exposed to electromagnetic fields.
Like what kind of symptoms?
Things like headaches, fatigue, dizziness. Some people get skin problems or they have trouble concentrating. It's called electromagnetic hypersensitivity, or EHS for short.
EHS. Huh. So are these people just like extra sensitive to EMF?
That's one way to think about it. But the thing is, there's no real test for it. And the symptoms can be pretty vague and they can be similar to other conditions too.
I see. So it can be hard to tell what's really going on.
Yeah, and that's why there's some debate in the medical community about whether EHS is a real thing.
I can see how that would be tricky. But for people who are experiencing these symptoms, it must be really frustrating.
Oh, absolutely. And it just goes to show that we all react to things differently, right? I mean, think about it. Some people are allergic to peanuts. Some people can eat a whole jar of peanut butter and be fine. It's the same with medications. What works for one person might not work for another.
And it sounds like it could be the same with EMF.
Exactly. What might be a minor annoyance for one person could be a huge problem for somebody else.
That's a good point. I guess it's all about being aware of how your own body reacts to things and being respectful of other people's experiences.
I think that's a great takeaway. And it also highlights how much we still have to learn about this whole EMF thing.
For sure. Well, this has definitely been a thought-provoking deep dive. I know I'm going to be thinking a lot more about EMF and all my devices. It's kind of scary, but also fascinating.
It is. And I think that's the key. Don't be afraid of technology. Just be informed.
So, not ditching my smartphone and going off the grid just yet.
No need for that. Just be mindful. Make smart choices.
I can do that. Thanks for all the great info and advice. It's been great talking to you.
Likewise.
And to all our listeners out there, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of smart homes and EMF radiation. It's a complex issue, and there's still a lot we don't know, but hopefully this has given you some food for thought.
We always encourage people to do their own research. See what resonates with you. Make choices that feel right for you and your family.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, stay curious.